Yes, I
Yes?
can.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we're doing, again, what we're doing today is Perek Dalet, Part 1, Esther's evolution into leadership. And this chapter, Esther assumes the leadership role, and Mordecai is going to take the back seat. This is what I said when I was muted. So now I'm just letting everybody hear 1 second. Everybody's in. I assume I've allowed everybody in. Okay. Mordecai's going to take the back seat to Esther. Esther's going to become the leader. Mordecai has one job in this chapter. He becomes the one who has to make Esther cognizant of her role. He becomes the teacher. Esther becomes the student. That's what occurs in this chapter. What the Rav is now going to do is he wants to understand what we can learn from Mordecai and Esther's leadership roles. How do they demonstrate a leadership that we can apply to our days? Okay, so that's the introduction. Now let's take a look. We're going to go Perek Dalet Psukim Aleph through Yud Dalet. Mordechai Yodas Kol Asher Naasov Vayikra Mordechai Espi Gedol Vayibasak Vayefer Vayetzei Mitoch Ha'ir Vayizak Saka Gedola Umara. And Mordechai learned of all that had been done, in allusion to the earlier chapter of Haman convincing Achashverosh to allow him to kill the Jews. He's going to pay for it. This is all chapter 3. Mordechai learned all. Mordechai Yodah, he learned all about this. And Mordechai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth with ashes. And he went into the midst of the city and cried loudly and bitterly. And he went as far as he could to the gate as far as he could, because you can't enter the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. The Medina, and in every province where the king's command and his decree extended, and in every province wherever the king's command and his decree extended, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, wailing, most of them lying in sackcloth and ashes. And Esther's maids and chamberlains came and told her all about what was going on, that Mordecai is out standing in the street in sackcloth. And the queen was greatly distressed, and she sent garments to clothe Mordecai so that he might take off his sackcloth, but he would not accept it. Then Esther summoned Hasach, the one of the king's chamberlains who had been appointed to attend to her, and ordered him, go out to Mordecai and learn what's going on. And Hasach went out to Mordecai onto the street where Mordecai was, which was in the front of the king's gate. Right? Pasuk Zayin. And Mordecai told him of all that happened to him, and all about the and Mordecai reported to Hasach to tell Esther all about that, what had happened, and all about the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay Achashverosh to the royal treasuries for the purpose of annihilating the Jews. In other words, Esther is totally clueless. Mordecai knows, she doesn't know a thing. And so now he's reporting. He also gave him a copy of the text of the decree. So now she's going to see it, right? She's going to see the hard copy, which was distributed in Shushan for their destruction, so that he might show it to Esther and inform her. Hasach is now telling her, Mordecai says, you are to go to the king to appeal to him and to plead for your people. Mordecai Hasach came and told Esther exactly what Mordecai had reported. Then Esther told Hasach, return to Mordecai and tell him the following. Va'am medinos hamelech yodim asher kol ish v'isha asher yavo al hamelech el chatzer hapnimis asher lo yikarei achas tasov la'amis levad me'asher yoshit lo hamelech es shavit hazav chaya. Vani loni crazy. Now, all the king's servants and all the people of the king's provinces are well aware that if anyone, man or woman, approaches the king in the inner court without being first summoned, there is one law pertaining to him. He's put to death, except for the person to whom the king shall extend the gold scepter so that he may live. Now, I have not been summoned for the last 30 days. Esther, and this was related, Esther's words were related to Mordechai. Here, Mordechai, now what does Mordechai respond? Pasuk Yud Gimel, Mordechai Lashiv Esther. Now we go back and tell Esther the following. Do not imagine that you will be able to escape in the king's palace any more than the rest of the Jews. You're not going to be able to hide there. He got it. For if you persist in keeping silent at a time like this, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from some other place, while you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether it was just for such a time as this that you have attained your royal position. Right? That's the end of what I want to teach this morning. These are the psukim, part one of the evolution of Esther becoming the heroine of the story. Esther becomes the leader. So let's go back and see what the Rav has to teach us. In particular, again, what the Rav is interested in seeing, discerning what we can learn from Esther and Mordechai, how they acted as leaders and how we, in turn, should act. Mordechai Yoda, right, very beginning, Mordechai Yoda, and Mordechai knew all of what was happening. Mordechai, that's how this chapter begins. Mordechai Yoda. What are these two words telling us? Mordechai Yoda and Mordechai knew. They seem superfluous. Do you have to tell me Mordechai knew? But these words are pregnant with information. They're filled with information that the reader must internalize. Those two words are the setting of this whole chapter of her evolution to become the queen, become the heroine of the story. These words inform us that Mordechai was able to put the dots together. He put the dots of what happened in chapter 3 to what happens now. He understood. These two words are teaching us that because Mordechai understood before anything actually happened, he had a picture of all that was occurring. He was able to think clearly, and he did not panic. He's thinking clearly, and that's crucial for a leader. You don't panic. He thought objectively, and he proceeds accordingly. So Mordechai Yoda is teaching us that Mordechai is able to take in all of the information, put the dots together, and construct a plan with clear thinking and not panic. By putting the dots together, Mordechai came to the conclusion that Esther was in the palace of Achashverosh. It was not by accident. She was placed there by divine decree to play a crucial role in Jewish history. It was that she was placed there, no one else. Esther was placed there, and he's putting these dots together, that she's there on purpose. Mordechai clearly understood what are the dots. Number one, Achashverosh's madness. Number two, Vashti's execution. And number three, Esther's ascent to the throne were not isolated events. They are all connected. Mordechai Yoda. Mordechai was able to put all of that together. Not that Mordechai knew information that no one else did. That's not what Mordechai Yoda means. Mordechai Yoda, the Rav is noting, means that Mordechai was able to see the entire picture and put this one dot with this one dot with this one dot and conclude clearly that he had to plan accordingly. He doesn't panic. He thinks clearly. Oh, Achashverosh has been acting really crazy, really like a madman. And what else happened? They executed Vashti. That is absurd. And what? Esther was put on the throne as the queen. Are these just disconnected points? Mordechai Yoda, Mordechai realizes They're all connected. And Mordechai, what?
His own role.
He understands. He's the teacher.
But that he didn't bow down. What about his
Yeah,
own role?
100. Well, that was last week, and when we studied that, Mordechai will not bow down. We realized because that was his personality would never allow him to bow to any human being, only to Hakadosh Baruch Hu. He was not going to humble himself to any human being like that. Only to the one and one power in the world.
And is he feeling responsible in terms of, you're saying what Mordechai Yada, is he also feeling like he's part of the
yes,
the
of course. He knows
Mordechai
knows now that he has to roll. Mordechai Yada means here, Mordechai has to act as the teacher. He puts it clearly in his head. He has to act as the teacher. Who's he going to teach? He's going to teach Esther. Esther at this point had no idea. She had no idea what was going on. She is clueless. Mordechai's knowledge is way ahead of Esther. Way ahead of Esther. His job is to introduce her to her essential role that she has to play. He was to instruct Esther that she was chosen by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to become the leader of the Jewish people. He realized, by the way, you can see the humility in Mordechai at this point. He realized he's not going to be the Redeemer. He's not going to be the focus of the rest of the book. What do we call it? Megillat Esther, on purpose. It's her story. And this is when it changes. Chapter 4 is when it changes from Mordechai to Esther. He's going to take a back seat, and he's willing to do that because Mordechai has to worry not about his own ego. Mordechai Yoda, his ego is not important. He has to save the Jewish people. And Esther would become the true heroine in the Megillah story. It's becoming her story. So Mordechai realized that he had to achieve two points. What are they? Number one, he had to share with Esther all that was transpiring because she's clueless. So he has to become her teacher, if you will, to tell her, to inform her what's going on. And number two, he has to impress upon Esther that she has a role to play. And that role is essential. She wasn't chosen to be queen to sit pretty. It all occurred because she has a duty to become the Redeemer. So he has to do two things again. He has to inform her of what's happening, and he has to impress her that she's going to play the role of Redeemer. That's Mordechai Yoda. But what the Rav is notifying, Mordechai Yoda doesn't mean he knew information no one else knew. Mordechai Yoda means he's clearly thinking. He understands. You have to put all of the pieces together and you respond accordingly. A leader can't panic. The moment a leader panics, he or she is not a leader. Mordechai Yoda. That is what is being told to us. But continue on in this pasuk. The last words, that's Mordechai Yoda. Vayizak za'aka gedola umara. And what happens? And he cried loudly and bitterly. Are these words teaching us how to pray to Hashem? Meaning the decibel level we're supposed to use when we dive into Hashem? Must we cry out to God? Do they teach us that we need to cry out with a loud prayer when we beseech HaKadosh Baruch Hu for salvation? The louder, the better? Is that what Vayizak Za'aka Gidola Umara is teaching us? Not at all. It's clearly not teaching us how to pray. Rather, these words have nothing to do with davening at all. Not at all. Rather, they're teaching us a lesson about Mordechai. Mordechai represents something greater than himself. Mordechai represents all of Klal Yisrael. And that explains, by the way, how Mordechai is able to push his ego into the back. Most people, their ego bothers them. What do you mean? I'm not going to be the focus of this story? I'm going to now turn it over to Esther? That's unbelievable. Why? Because his cry is described as piercing and loud because it's not an individual. He represents all of Klal Yisrael. It's millions of people wrapped into that cry. He's representing more than himself. He's representing Klal Yisrael. Haman understood that because go back to Perek Gimel, Pasuk Vav, last week's Perek. Perek Gimel Pasuk Vav. What does Haman say about Mordechai? Vayivez beinav lishlach yod b'Mordechai levado ki gidu lo es am Mordechai v'rakesh Haman lashmid es kol hayudim asher b'chol malchus Achashverosh am Mordechai. Who Haman understood that, right? In Pasuk Vav. However, it seemed contemptible to him to lay hands on Mordechai alone, for they had made known to him the right that he wasn't bowing. So Haman sought to destroy all the Jews who were throughout the entire kingdom of Achashverosh. Take the look, the last words, Am Mordechai. Haman knew that Mordechai wasn't just an individual. Mordechai was the leader of the people. Mordechai took the people on his shoulders, and that's who Mordechai is. When Esther becomes leader, this transformation happens to Esther. For example, we're going to see that. When Esther fasts, everyone fasts. She becomes the leader. And when she's clothed in royal garments, the whole community feels protected by her status. Esther, like Mordechai, become the people. They're not just individuals. And that's the second lesson in leadership. A leader of the Jewish people can't be just concerned about his or her own ego, his or her own individualism. Not at all. You represent Klal Yisrael, and you must think in those terms. And Mordechai and Esther are the example par excellence of the leaders who understand that their role is to represent the entire nation. Continue on. Now the Rav jumps to Pasuk Ches. Pasuk Ches. Vespashegin Ksavadasan Shenitan Bishushan Lashmidam Nasan La Rosa Esther Lagilo Latzavos Oleo, right? Everybody has it. Elamelch Ischanelo Levakesh Milofonov Amo. Right? I have 1 second. Yes. Lavo El Hamelach Lischanein. Right, that's what I want to focus on. Lavo El Hamelach Lischanein Lo Levakesh Milofonov Lo Amo. And so that he might show it to Esther, he sends the text of the decree, bidding her to go to the king to appeal to him to plead for her people. The Rav notes there are 2 different types of service that man has in relationship to Hashem. There is the constant day-to-day service that each of us have. That is formulated by Micha Hanavi in Perek Vav in Pasuk Ches in Micha. Higid lecha adam, ma tov, ma Hashem doresh mincha, ki masos mishpat va'avas chesed v'atznea leches im Elokecha. The most important pasuk in the entire Micha. One of those best-known psukim in the entire Tanakh. Tell man, what does Hashem demand of him? He's asos mishpat. You're to do mishpat, and to your avas chesed, and you're to act humbly, you act modestly, walking with God. This statement, the Rav notes, is the most democratic concept in Judaism because it's universally applicable to every Jew and Jewess alike. It's applicable to every Jew at all times. That is what we must do all the time. But then there are singular individuals who are summoned by Hashem for a one-time service. One-time service. Micha is all the time for all of us. But then there are unique individuals HaKadosh Baruch Hu chooses for a one-time service. Only they are charged with the special assignment. Nobody else is charged with the special assignment. It's a special assignment for unique individuals at a unique moment in history. For example, Avram was called upon to do the Akedah. Nobody else. Avram, one time, Avram is to do the Akedah. In this pasuk, here in the Megillah, we have Mordechai calling upon Esther to realize that she has a unique role. She has, of course, the Micha role. Everybody has the Micha role. But you, Esther, have a unique role in history. Only she can do it, and only she can do it now. It's her moment and her moment alone. So there are 2 different types of assignments. There's the democratic assignment that applies to all of us. Then there is those unique moments in history where one individual at one moment has to respond. Quite often, one doesn't even realize that what is happening to them is creating that moment. Esther didn't at first realize she was being placed exactly where she was to play this special role. This is what Mordechai taught her in Perek Dalit, in this chapter, Pasuk Yud Dalit. That's exactly what he was telling her. And who can say, Esther, could it not be for just such a time that you've come into royalty? In other words, you, Esther, are going to have a unique role to play. And you, and only you, and you now have to play that role. Continue on to Pasuk Yud Gimel. And this is all developing the Rav's idea of understanding the role of the leader, as Mordechai and Esther are demonstrating it in these psukim, right? Vayomer Mordechai, lo shivel Esther, al tidami benafshech limaleit beis hamelech mikol hayudim. Do not imagine that you can escape the king's palace from the fate of all the Jews. Esther, you might be living in the palace, but are you going to escape? If you don't assume the role that you have to do now, because you are the unique one and it's the unique moment. If you don't do that, do not imagine that you can escape to the king's palace from the fate of all the Jews. These words by Mordechai, we should understand better than anyone else after October 7th. We've seen them come alive. We have to know that if a Jew is being persecuted and abused anywhere on the globe, the world jury is going to be impacted. You can be off 7,000 miles away. The Jew in Los Angeles is going to have that, it's going to impact the Jew everywhere. People are shocked by the rise of anti-Semitism in America. What does Israel have to do with America? Why is the Jew here on Pico Boulevard being impacted by that which is happening thousands and thousands of miles away? So what is what is Mordechai teaching us? A very important lesson, not only in leadership, but a lesson in Jewish history. Al tidami b'nafshech limaleit beis hamelech mikol hayudim, which really means you're going to feel that which happens to every Jew, no matter where that Jew is. If a Jew is being abused anywhere on the globe, it's going to impact every Jew. We shouldn't be at all surprised that what is occurring. This pasuk is teaching us that the fate of the Jews are all connected, and we shouldn't be shocked by it at all. Our fate doesn't distinguish, in the Rav's words, between aristocrats and common folk, between the rich and the poor, between a prince garbed in royal purple and a pauper begging door from door, between the pietist and the assimilationist. Even though we speak a plethora of languages, even though we are inhabitants of different lands, even though we look different, even though we live in varying and unequal social and economic conditions, we still share the same fate. It doesn't matter what we look like, where we live, how we can be rich, we can be poor. It doesn't matter. A Jew is suffering somewhere on the globe. It's going to impact us. It's going to impact us. The Rav went to the Lubavitcher Rebbe's 30th Farbrengen. I remember it vividly. I was in yeshiva at the time. I'm the one who gave the Rav the black hat that he wore to the Farbrengen, because the Rav had a navy blue hat, and it was during intercession, and I was in Smicha, and I was doing graduate work at the time, and I was one of the few, and I was head of the dormitory at the time. And Barry Holzer, Dr. Barry Holzer, was the Misharis of the Rav, and he came running in, and he said, and the limo was outside waiting. They sent a limo to bring the Rav to the Farbrengen in Crown Heights, and the Rav turned to Barry Holzer, Dr. Barry Holzer, and he said, "Get me a black hat. I need a black hat." And the Rav's words were, "When you go to Rome, you act like the Romans." Those were his words to Barry. And Barry came running into an empty dormitory because it was intercession, so the boys were all away. And he comes running into my room and he says, "Elazar, we got to find the Rav." a black hat. We found the Rav a black hat. It was too small for him. That's why in the pictures you'll see that the hat is small on the Rav's head. But that is the true story. Anyhow, at the end of the Rav's visit at the Farbrengen, the Rav, it was a historic moment because the Rebbe wanted the Rav to come very badly. It was going to be at that time, Rav Shach was bitterly opposed to the Rebbe. And he wanted the Rav's stempel of approval. He knew that would make waves in the world. And it's true, it did. And the Rav came. The Rav asked only for one thing from the Rebbe, that not directly, the Mesharis of the Rebbe who came to see the Rav to arrange it, he said, I just need an armchair to sit on because the Rav had a terrible back. So it was never, if you take a look at the pictures of all the Farbrengen, nobody sits at the same level as the Rebbe. The Rebbe's at the table and everybody's behind him. The only time that anybody sat near the Rebbe was Rav Soloveitchik. Rav Soloveitchik was giving a seat right near the Rebbe with an armchair. So they both had armchairs. That was what the Rav asked. And then the Rav stayed for a few hours, I think for 2 hours, for the Farbrengen, and then he got up to leave. And that was the only time in history, by the way, that the Rebbe got up to say goodbye to anybody. You always came over to the Rebbe and shook his hand, but here, and great leaders of state came to the Rebbe. But the Rav got up, the Rebbe got up. And the Rebbe shook the Rav's hands, and supposedly the following conversation occurred. It was reported in the press. He said, the Rebbe turned to the Rav and said, your great-great-great-grandfather, the Vilna Gaon, and my great-great-great-grandfather, the Baal HaTanya, who were bitterly opposed, they had a tremendous machlokas, now are united. Now are united in Shemayim, because look, the great-great-great-grandson and the great-great-great-grandson. And he says, you see, now we're united.
Sorry, Vilna Gaon
and the Baal HaTanya. Baal HaTanya. The Rebbe was the great-great-great-grandson of the Baal HaTanya.
Yeah.
And the Rav was the great-great-great-grandson of the Vilna Gaon. So he said, now they're united in heaven. And the Rav supposedly said, no, it did not happen tonight. That happened in Auschwitz. The Rav responded, that happened in Auschwitz. In other words, all Jews were united in Auschwitz. The Nazis didn't say, oh, you're a Lubavitcher, you're a Misnagid, you're a Chassid. They didn't care who you were. You were Jewish. That's the lesson that this pasuk is teaching us. Mordechai is teaching us this lesson through Esther, that our enemies unite us more than anyone else. And we have to understand that. We have no reason to be shocked when this happens. They unite us. And so it happened with October 7th, right? A very important lesson that resonates from these psukim here in the Megillah. Now, for the last pasuk for today, take a look at pasuk Yudalet. Ki amacharesh tacharishi bo'es hazos revach v'hatzolo ya'amod la'yunim mimokam acher va'at uveis avich tovedu u'mi yodea im le'es kazos higat lamalchus. What is this very important pasuk? This is the response to Esther. Esther responded what? He said, get ready to go in to defend your people. And she responded, don't you know the law? If you're not summoned, you can be killed. And so what does he answer? For if you persist in keeping silent at a time like this, what's he telling Esther? It's you and now. Relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from some other place, while you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether it was just for such a time that you attained this royal position. Let's understand this. This Rav develops this pasuk beautifully. This is the crux of this parak. The most important pasuk in this parak is this pasuk. Va'at uveis avich tovedu. The Rav says there are 3 rules of what he calls Judaism's doctrine of assignment. This is the the fascinating way that, and the fancy way that the Rav develops it. He calls it Judaism's doctrine of assignment. And there are 3 rules pertaining to that. What does he mean by Judaism's doctrine of assignment? He means every one of us is a Shaliach Hashem. We all are our emissaries, our ambassadors of God in this world. And each one of us, 3 rules apply to us in our shlichus. Rule 1, that's what he means by Judaism's doctrine of assignment. Each individual has his or her role to play, and God does not give us a role that we cannot achieve. Each of us has a role to play, and that role we can achieve. God would not have given us the role if we couldn't achieve it. If we could not achieve it, we would not have been assigned to the role. Esther, like King David, like David HaMelech, was to be a redeemer of our people. David HaMelech, the strapping David HaMelech, and the little maiden, even though she was a delicate, lonely maiden, right? She was going to become the redeemer of the people. It doesn't matter your stature. In other words, HaKadosh Baruch Hu appoints you, you have a role. She was placed in the role as queen because Achashverosh crowned her for this moment in Jewish history. Not so, as I said before, to sit pretty. She has a role to play. Point 1. Point 2, if one refuses to do their role, the assignment will be achieved some other way by someone else. It need not be done by you necessarily if you refuse, but if you refuse, the assignment is going to be achieved. Number 3, the individual who does not answer the call of history, Rav Soloveitch points out, is a traitor. And this traitor, the sin is unpardonable. There's no pardon for this sin. Again, 3 lessons, right? Number 1, we each have a role and God appoints that role to us and we can achieve it, or else God would not have appointed it to us. Number 2, if we refuse to do it, the assignment will be achieved, perhaps by someone else, but it will be achieved. And number 3, the individual who does not answer the call is a traitor, and there's no pardon for this act of being a traitor. That's what the Rav understands in this pasuk when Mordechai tells Esther, Ki macharesh tacharishi be'ez hazos revach v'hatzolo yamod la'yudin mimakom acher. Right? The assignment will be achieved. Va'at uveis avich tovedu. And you'll disappear. There's no pardon for you because if you act like a traitor, you're gone, right? Realize you have a role to play. What does this mean? The Rav focusing on the words la'es kozos, just such a time, right? And who knows? Maybe just for this moment, he got la malchus. What does it mean, just such a time? So the Rav focuses on those words, now, this such a time. And the Rav notes that it's important to remember when the story of Megillat Esther actually happened. You have to understand the context of this story. Lo'es kazos. What do those words mean? Lo'es kazos. And the Rav here develops something crucial to understand the whole sefer of the Megillat Esther. It's crucial to understand this so you understand what Mordechai and Esther found themselves confronting and how they responded. The Megillah occurred at the time the Rav coins the twilight hour of Jewish history. You hear this? The Megillah occurs in what the Rav calls the twilight hour of Jewish history. What in the world does the Rav mean by describing Megillah as the twilight hour of Jewish history? So the Rav explains that the story of Purim occurred and an enormous, difficult adjustment was occurring to the Jewish people. The Jewish people were left in turmoil. Why? Because the Megillah occurs at the very end of the prophetic era. It's occurring as prophecy is leaving the face of history. It's true that in both eras, God communicated with man, but the nature of the communication that occurred during the prophetic era is totally different than the post-prophetic era. Up until this time, our communication with HaKadosh Baruch Hu was via nevuah, via prophecy. We had a direct dialogue with God. The prophet communicated exactly what God told. The communication was clear, it was understandable, and there was no debate about it. Now, that's all changing. That's la'es kazos. Something is changing in this story. Very important to understand. The Rav noted, with the transition from a prophetic to a non-prophetic community, the Jewish historical experience changed completely. This was a moment crucial to understand. It's transformative. It's a difficult moment. Through prophecy, our mission was precisely defined. We knew exactly what our mission was. Moshe, for example, doesn't have to debate what his mission is, right? The pasuk says in Shemos, it says, speak to the children of Israel that they go forward. Lift your rod and stretch out your hand over the sea, right? Perik Yudalit, pasuk Tezvav and Tezayin. Did Moshe have to debate what he was told? Go tell the people. And what else was he told? Lift your hand and put it over the sea, and it's going to split. It was clear as clear can be. Moshe did not have to make any decisions, right? There was no freedom of choice. There was no debate. All that it entailed, he was told. He understood exactly what he was to do. He understood exactly what to impart to the people. It was not a guessing game. He had no need to make choices, and he had no problem in how to implement it. He was told exactly how to implement it. Lift your hand, and this is what you're going to do. He was told exactly what to do. What happens now? That clarity is gone. Mordechai and Esther have a different experience. La'es kazos, it's totally a different one. They did not receive clear, defined mandates, right? Esther didn't even know that she was placed in the throne as queen because she's to become the redeemer. Mordechai, Yoda. Mordechai puts the dots together, not through prophecy. Mordechai is doing it totally. He's figuring it out. Now you and I have to figure out the message. When the prophet received it, the prophet was told, and he understood, and he imparted to us, and we understood the message. At best, for Mordechai and Esther, their understanding of the mandate was multifaceted. It was left to them to interpret exactly what was expected of them, and to how to figure, not only to figure out what was expected to them, but to figure out what else, how to implement the message. The assignment, how do I implement this? They had to choose between alternatives. I will quote the Rav. In Egypt, God acted, man was an onlooker. In Persia, God summoned man to act freely and wisely under God's supervision and watchful eyes. Listen to that again. In Mitzrayim, God acted, man was an onlooker. Isn't that true? We stood aside. We were told exactly what to do. We were told, bring the Pesach, Korban Pesach to your home and don't leave your home. Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to do everything for us. We didn't walk out of our homes on the night of Yetzias Mitzrayim until God told us. God was doing all of the work outside. Lo ayidei malach, lo ayidei shaliach. We say that in the Haggadah. That's the prophetic age. That's not what's happening now. Mordechai and Esther, number one, have to figure out the assignment. And number two, what else do they have to do? They have to figure out how to implement it, right? If we think that because of this transformation, God has abandoned us, this is totally incorrect. God has not at all abandoned us, but many people look at the story of Purim and come to that conclusion. Oh, this is all man. No, because this is the only sefer in the whole Tanakh whose name is not mentioned. Oh, there you got it. Why is God not mentioned? Because of this transformation from an age of prophecy to an age where prophecy no longer exists, right? No longer exists. But does God still communicate? Yes. But we, man, have to understand and discern what the message is and how to implement it. And it becomes very difficult. With this background, we can now understand, the Rav points out, a Gemara in Chulin, Daf Kuf, Kuf Lamed Tes, 139b, Kuf Lamed Tes. The Gemara, it makes a strange comment. And the Rav now says we can understand that Gemara. It's a strange comment, an enigmatic question, and a funny answer. Listen to this. The Gemara asks, where is an allusion to Esther in the Torah? That's what the Gemara asks. Me'ayin but Torah. Where in the Torah do we see Esther? And the Gemara answers, it's found in Devarim, Perek Lamed Aleph, Pasuk Yud Ches, where it says, Haster Astir. It sounds like Esther, right? But it's not a play on the words. Haster Astir means what? I shall hide my countenance on that day. Again, the question was, where in the Torah, the Gemara asks, where in the Torah is Esther mentioned? And the Torah and the Gemara says, we see it. It's there in the Haster Astir, and it's not a play on words. It's rather, and I shall hide my countenance on that day. That's what that pasuk means. So we have to ask, honestly, what does Esther have to do with the Torah? That's a weird question. Esther is not part of the biblical story at the time of the Torah, right? She's in Ksuvim, she's in Megillah. She's not at the time of the Torah. Esther did not live at the time of the Torah. So how could she be alluded to in the Torah? What could the Gemara mean by raising this question? But even more problematic, what is the answer that it gives? What does Haster Astir have to do with the story of the Megillah? I shall hide my countenance on that day. What does that mean? Okay, now we can understand it, the Rav says, because we understand that the Torah recounts the story of our community when we were guided by Nevuah. The Torah is the document of Nevuah, right? It was the time when our community experienced direct contact and communication with Hashem, and we had a sense of triumph because we had that relationship with Hashem. The Navi told us exactly what to do, how to do it, and when to do it. The Gemara was therefore asking, what kind of message does the Torah have for the non-prophetic community in its hour of distress? What's the Torah tell me now, of October 7th, if you will? What's the Torah's answer for the non-prophetic community? We don't have prophecy now. How are we supposed to understand this? In other words, the Gemara was presenting the following challenge in the words of the Rav. Where is there in the Torah an allusion to the silent, mute confrontation between a wicked, cruel monster and a lonely Jewish maiden on whose frail shoulders God placed the heavy load of historical responsibility? How can the Jew triumph over his adversaries and enemies if God has stopped speaking to him? If the cryptic messages he receives remain unintelligible and incomprehensible? That's what the Gemara was telling us. The Gemara was asking, where is Esther mentioned in the Torah? It doesn't mean Esther. It means, how am I to figure out what Hashem wants post October 7th? That's what it means. How am I supposed? But God is talking to us. We have to figure it out. God is talking to us. God is talking to Esther. God is talking to Mordechai. Mordechai, Yoda. Mordechai was able to clearly put the dots together. We have to put the dots together and figure it out. It is difficult, but Hashem is talking. And we have to tune in to the answer. The Gemara's answer is an explanation, isn't an explanation. It's rather a statement of fact. Remember what the Gemara answers. Where is Esther mentioned? Haster Astir. That God is hidden. That's a statement of not explanation. That's a statement of fact. Even during the non-prophetic era, when our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Hester Ponim. What does Hester Ponim mean? We can't see Hashem. The Nevuah era, the age of Nevuah, of prophecy, We had a clear communication line with Hashem. Now it becomes foggy. Now it's cloudy. Man is still obligated even when it's a cloudy day, right? Today is gorgeous, right? Yesterday, you have that image of yesterday and the day before. When it's cloudy, you carry on because you have an assignment and you got to figure it out. It's a difficult role. Mordechai and Esther are the story of us. There is no sefer in Tanakh that should resonate so much with us as Mordechai and as Megillat Esther. As we're living it right now. It's Haster Punim. It's Hester Punim. We don't understand what happened October 7th. We got to figure out how to respond and how to implement it. Man has to make choices, has to make decisions, even if they are difficult ones to choose from. He must be courageous. He must implement what he believes is the correct choices because Hashem will inspire us to do the right thing. That's what we believe. We believe we will be inspired to do the right thing. This is exactly what happens to Esther. And this is what the Gemara is teaching. God is demanding of Esther to do what? To be the leader. Is it easy to be a leader? No, it's not easy to be a leader. You have to make decisions because God is expecting that of you, Esther. And that's what Mordechai was teaching her. You got to rise to the occasion. The Torah tells us, the Rav notes, in Devarim, Perek Lamed Aleph, Posuk Chof Aleph, about the Torah, V'ansa hashira hazos. This song shall answer. What's this song? The Torah. Means the Torah exists even when you live in a non-prophetic age. V'ansa hashira hazos. God promises us. We got to figure it out. Our leaders have to lead us. We got to figure it out. We got to figure out how to implement it. And we're doing it. And we're doing it. That's exactly what we got to do. We got to go to war in this case. We got to fight. We got to defend ourselves. We can't sit back. That's what we're doing. That's what we're doing. V'ansa hashira hazos. And we will do it. So the Megillah is teaching us this chapter so far, up in this chapter in Perek Dalet. It's a crucial chapter, right? It's the chapter of Mordechai acting as teacher and taking a step backwards. He's no longer going to be the leader. What is he promoting? Esther. Because there are unique people at unique times in history that they have to become the leaders. And it's a difficult time. And now you should really understand. Ka'es hazos, what do you mean this time? This time was, we read it. It looks like a simple story. How many times have we read this story over and over and over and over? It looks like a very simple, novel, if you will. But it's not. It's life. And that's how the Rav is reading it. This is life. And it should resonate with us, in particular, as we've confronted, unfortunately, in Eretz Yisrael. Because anywhere on the map a Jew suffers, every Jew has a rippling effect. It has an impact on every one of us. So we shouldn't be surprised with the anti-Semitism. We shouldn't be surprised that what's happening in Eretz Yisrael is happening to us as well. That's what is being taught to us. And it's also being taught that this was a difficult moment in history because, as the Rav said, it was the time where that transformation occurs from the prophetic age to a non-prophetic age. So you have to choose the message. You have to understand the message. You have to choose clearly. Is that message applying to me? Am I supposed to rise to the occasion? If I am, then I have to do it, right? If you take a look at the Wall Street Journal today, you will see on the front page, the bottom of the page, a fascinating, you should all read it. It's a fascinating article by the mother of Hersh Polin. And the Wall Street Journal gives her a whole, that starts on the front page and then a full page. Here's a woman who understands that she has been called upon to be an Esther of her time. It's her moment, nobody else's moment. She has to do it, and she says so in so many words. She says, I'm the mother. I got to act like this. I gotta be the one who's promoting my son. Unfortunately, it doesn't sound good, but you know what happened to him. But read that article and you realize there are people positioned at moments in history. She has a unique mission and she knows it. And she's rising to the occasion. Mordechai and Esther have the unique position and they rise to the occasion. Mordechai acts as the teacher. Esther becomes the pupil par excellence. She rises to the moment. After this, initially she didn't want to, but that quickly changes. So the rest of this chapter is going to see what? Esther become the leader, the evolution of Esther as a leader, right? So we learned a number of things. Number one, why the book has her name, not anybody else's name. And number two, why Hashem is absent from this Sefer in Tanakh, because it's Haster Astir. It is a period of time where God does not communicate directly to us. And that is clearly being projected by the fact Hashem's name is not even mentioned in the entire book, even though we clearly know, right? Every time, what does Chazal say? Every time the word Hamelech, who's Hamelech? The one king. And that's why there's a beautiful custom to write, it's called a Hamelech Megillah, that every, outside of the first column is Vahi, Bimet, right? But then the Sofer arranges that every column begins with the word Hamelech, Hamelech, Hamelech. It's called the Hamelech. It's more expensive to do. The Sofer has to arrange it that he's going to write beautifully, and he's going to start a new column with Hamelech, Hamelech, alluding to Haster Astir. We realize Hashem is still communicating to us. Hashem might not be directly communicating. We're not hearing it through a nevuah, but he's still communicating to us. And that's how the Rav understands the beginning of this chapter. Then next week, we'll continue with the rest of the parak, and we'll see how Esther responds. How does Esther achieve her role as leader? Begins all in this chapter. Okay, next week.
It's amazing how her name became, even before we knew that it's hidden.
Yes. Yes,
amazing.
clearly the allusion to the Haster Astir, you hear her name, right? Esther, Aster,
Wasn't her
Astir.
real name Hadassah?
Yes, that's the Hebrew word, right? Esther is the Persian word. That's
Oh.
correct. That is correct.
Oh, I didn't know.
Hadassah, he Esther. Hadassah was her Hebrew name, right? 100%. But Esther, right,
Hadassah.
does have the Haster Astir, right? She's the one who has to come to confront this post-Nevuah period and be a leader. She's a great woman. She's unbelievable. Okay?
Especially in those days,
Thank you.
Yeah.
that woman.
Yeah,
She's the
100%.
first, right?
Ara yom hazeh, ara yom hazeh. Okay, so next week we'll continue and we'll see what else we can learn.
So that
Thank you so much.
My
Thank you, Rabbi Muskin.
Thank you. Thank you. Everybody should have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi. You too.
Thank you, Rabbi. It was
Okay. Have a lovely, lovely day.
She did?
No, I don't think
No,
so.
I'm worried.
No.
She always comes up.